Okay, very good. Okay, so I will just remain by saying this is the Chinese versus European entrepreneurship panel with Felix, with Santiago, and with Ma. Okay, big round of applause, please, for the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Esperamos un poco, ¿no? Hey, Joe, shall we wait a second?
No.
People get seated, come on.
No. Well, it's your time.
Time is counting, actually.
Time is counting.
Yeah, but let people get in, my friend.
I thought China was supposed to be like, don't wait, right?
Well, China
tell this guy what's supposed to happen.
China has a long history of patience, so we've got a lot of patience.
Okay.
Yeah?
No, I think start. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not producing sausages, am I?
Do we sing a song or something, or?
No. I'll just wait. I said.
Oh, okay.
We have an art.
People are coming from lunch or something, or?
No, they're just coming in, as you can see.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Okay. The big thing is you never leave a pause, right? You have to always leave something going on the stage, or something like that. Okay, I think we're nearly ready.
Good.
Nearly ready. Okay. And, well, when the clock starts to tick, maybe. Okay. You should be doing bomb disposal or something like that, because you're the coolest man under pressure. When everyone else is panicking, your heartbeat is like
no panicking.
Slowing down.
So thank you very much. Thank you for your patience, and thanks. First, I'm going to thank the South Summit organizers for hosting us today here. Thanks to you, Joe, also for your patience. And also a special thanks to Professor Ma Pin, Academic Director of the iChina Center. He is the author of the report that you might have in your hands. And also thanks to other contributors who are within that report. Well, the iChina Center is a new initiative by a university, which first will try to understand what's the role of China in the world, politically, economically, and of course, culturally. Second, I think the iChina Center will serve as a means to enhance the presence of a university in Asia in general and in China in particular. And third, we would like the iChina Center also serve as a means to understand how our students can benefit from China's current state of development and wealth. Well, to come to this point has been a long journey. As the Chinese say, 千里取信, 须臾足下. A long journey does take a first step. The iChina Center creation is due to the vision of Diego del Alcázar and also to the unwavering commitment of Santiago Íñiguez, president of IE University, on the realization of that vision. What is on the top of the agenda of the iChina Center? Well, we would like to write case studies on companies, present reports like the one we're presenting today, and also organize events about China to try to help to understand the new dynamics of the world economy, and also to try to see how to address them from the point of view of teaching management skills, which is the pivotal, the most important vocation of a university. It is no coincidence that the report we're presenting today is called, or it is a comparison between European and Chinese entrepreneurship. Because as you might know, entrepreneurship is in a university's DNA. Having said that, I'm going to leave the floor to my president. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felix, Professor Bin Ma. Thanks very much for the invitation to this panel, since I can say ni hao and a few more words in Chinese, but I'm fascinated actually at the Chinese culture, and what I will try in my very brief aperitif. My presentation is actually just a small aperitif before the very interesting presentation of the conclusions of this report, which is a comparative report between entrepreneurship habits in China and in Europe. But let me share with you something that I've been gathering over the past years. I teach management strategy at IE University, and over the past 10 years, I've asked my students who come from many different latitudes and regions, and this is just a picture of the composition of one of the latest groups of the global MBA. You can actually see that the composition of the class is very varied. So what I do at the end of my course is asking them to respond how they see how they can actually elaborate on the opinions of how Chinese do business. This I ask, to the Chinese managers who visit our school, because we receive every year a number of groups coming from Chinese business schools. And then I do the same exercise, but with Western managers. The purpose, of course, as you can imagine, is to gather what is the opinions on both sides and to try to put up a list of the cliches. Because my point, we are actually living in a world of cliches. And the purpose of actually running these comparative studies is to show that culture is much more deeper than the cliches. That there's lots of opportunities to be explored in China, for example, despite that we may have a very preconceived, prejudiced idea of how the Chinese market works or how is the management culture in China. So let me show you, and I hope you can actually see the list. I wonder whether you can see on those screens the list of items that appear here. This is actually the list of opinions gathered from Western managers about China. I will go quickly, through the list, since probably most of you can actually see this. They don't speak English. This is very common. No? They never say no, and they're ambiguous. They lie frequently, and many other things. This is, the sort of things that normally Western managers think about China. I'm not entering now, whether they are true or not. They are cliches that we tend to form because it's very helpful, to use models, cliches in order to take decisions. But the fact is that, we have to question those cliches many times, no? It's very interesting. Some of them are really interesting, no? Like, they always bring someone from the Communist Party, things like this, no? Anyway, if you actually look, which is more interesting because most of the audience is actually composed of Western managers. So if you look actually at what are the opinions of Chinese managers, including CEOs, on Westerners, you probably see that there's it mirrors to a large extent what we think many times about the Chinese. And there's a sort of reciprocal relationship here between cliches. Of course, they believe that we disregard their culture and values. We don't speak a word of Chinese, let's be very honest. They even have to translate their own names into Western, Christian sorts of names. They believe that we are stranded by unions and by the so-called social rights and many other things. No? Of course, these slides are available for you, and they're actually on my LinkedIn, site in case you want to check them. But anyway, the point, and I'm going to hand over very quickly to Professor Binma, is that we need to know much deeper the Chinese culture. We cannot stay at the level of cliches. If you want to become true entrepreneurs, there's lots of opportunities in China and the other way around. Of course, Chinese are also very keen on discovering opportunities in the Western world. And my suggestion is that you get to know the Chinese culture deeper, that you spend time dealing with Chinese managers. And of course, there's a great opportunity now that Professor Binma is going to share with us the conclusion of this very interesting report. So I'll stop here, and then our moderator, how should we proceed now? Do you want to say a few words, or Professor maybe Martin, I'll pass this device, to you. Thank you.
Thank you, President Santiago. Thank you, Felix. And thank you, everyone, for coming here, share the information about the comparison between Chinese and European entrepreneurship, which is our launching research report of our IE China Center. As Santiago just mentioned, there are a lot of stereotypical thinking about the two groups of people, let's say, generally speaking, Westerners versus East Asian people, or specifically Chinese people. And this gives us an idea of launching this report of Chinese or research project called the Chinese versus European Entrepreneurship, a comparison. So in this report, instead of answer all of the questions we have concerned about, we're trying to figure out what are the questions to ask. So at this stage, we need to ask the right questions to see where are the differences or similarities between the two regional area or the two types of entrepreneurship in those areas. So as the center, we try to understand the rise of the Chinese economy, and specifically through business approach, like whether there is successful practices, strategies that we can create new knowledge as an educational institution and transfer the knowledge for global benefit. In order to do so, this report gave us some initial primary understanding of how entrepreneurship is related to local economy. More specifically, what are the differences and similarities between entrepreneurship in China and in Europe. So the data was collected from survey. We reached out to entrepreneurs in both China and Europe, and eventually we got 104 Chinese valid answers and 105 European entrepreneurs' answers. And the coverage geographically is pretty broad. As you can see, it covers almost the whole country and the major cities in Europe. And the time span was 2 months. And first, we want to ask, what's the difference or similarities of the person, namely entrepreneurs? Are they the same group of people doing similar things in different locations, or they behave entirely different? Okay, so in terms of comparing entrepreneurs, first, we looked at the demographics, for example, age and education. It's interesting that we found that the Chinese entrepreneurs are generally older than European entrepreneurs. And then we looked into their education background, and we realized that actually Chinese entrepreneurs, they spend more years in graduate level education, which is surprising to a lot of people because stereotypically we would think the first generation entrepreneurs in China who are in their maybe late 50s or early 60s, they may not even have a formal college level education, let alone graduate level, right? However, if we look at the age of the Chinese sample, they're in their early 40s and the late 30s. So that's a different generation. And in that generation, people are generally educated in the college level. And then at the later career, most of the entrepreneurs, they may invest in their education in the EMBA program because they see that as a good opportunity for social connections, or political connections so that they can use for business development in the future. And that said, we are also interested in education is not the same. Some educations happens in your own country, some may happen in another country that may benefit you even in a broader way. So we looked at their education abroad experience. And not surprisingly, the European entrepreneurs are advantages on this issue. And like I said at the very beginning, we're raising more questions than just giving the answers. So this actually gives us thinking of the increasing population of international students from China around the world. Like in the United States, if you go into a college, you see a lot of Chinese international students, and here at IE, the same thing is happening. So we're expecting an increase in the Chinese entrepreneurs' foreign education in the near future. And more, we want to see how it impacts their, for example, globalization-related strategy, etc. And another interesting thing we found from the data is about the gender diversity issue. So if we look at the two figures, in the Chinese sample, we have more female entrepreneurs, which seems like an advantageous position in the gender diversity issue. And to reason these facts, we think there are two possible causes. One is in the communist system, the gender equality has always been emphasized, like treated equally, women should reach out to work equally as a man. And another thing is the family financial pressure. Although China's economy is growing and everything, but in a lot of measures, China is still a developing country, even now, let alone when the entrepreneurs started their business. So maybe women had a bigger pressure for them to work as a man outside of the household. So that's a possible cause too. And for these possible causes, we're not saying Chinese, in terms of gender diversity, is in a very ideal position already. No, both populations are far from ideal. And we, in the report, we recognize that both the European Union and the Chinese government have initiated policies that promoting even more gender diversity equality here. So we're looking forward to track those trends and see what happens. Further, we want to look at entrepreneurs, how they operate their business, right? That's the hardcore of their career and their job. So we looked at how they learned their operation. And surprisingly, both populations shared equal, more or less, experience of new ventures. So all the entrepreneurs in our sample, they are in the mean number on their third or fourth new ventures. So before this current new venture, they already had 2 or 3 ones as experiences. So entrepreneurship is once again like other managerial skills you can learn from experiences. And then we looked at their leadership behaviors. And we found what we call transformational leadership behavior. That's when the leader tried to challenge status quo and tried to provide visionary guidance for their employees for innovation. So we always believe that entrepreneurial transformational leadership behaviors are very important for success of entrepreneurships. And once again, surprisingly, we found, given all the historical, cultural, political, even educational differences between the two populations, at work, acting as a leader, they actually behave similarly. And that raises our concern. Maybe it's caused by a standardized business school education across the world, right? Because these days, if you walk into a Chinese business school and see their curriculum, I don't think you will see a big surprise comparing to a European business school or an American business school. And that, again, further, we would think, is there a need or necessity for customized business school education so that they behave similarly in a lot of good behaviors, and at the same time, they can address some local customized problems that they learned from using the skills they learned from business schools. So here we finished basically the comparison between the two populations as entrepreneurs. And we can see there are a lot of differences going on, and we raised a lot of further questions we're going to work on at IE China Center. And further, we looked at the startups, the companies. So first, we looked at their financial sources. And you can see, surprisingly, most Chinese entrepreneurship in our sample are privately funded, which is, again, maybe counterintuitive to a lot of Westerner audiences, because you may think a communist system, maybe the company should be funded primarily by the state, by the government, which is actually not the case. And the reason behind it is partly from the cultural root that Chinese people may want to take control, fully control over their company. They don't want to dilute their control over the company by having external capital. And another reason is the banking and credit system in China. Traditionally, they favor the state-owned company, not privately owned entrepreneurship or startups, because of the risk aversion issue here, right? Because state-run company are more likely to survive. So both causes are the driver behind this fact that in the Chinese sample, we have more privately funded companies. And that said, there's a huge opportunity there for foreign capital, for local government capital, and local capital to invest in this privately owned companies and to take the ride with their development. Further, with the customers, interesting findings here too. Comparing to the European entrepreneurship, the companies who usually serve niche population as their customers. For example, you work on an app serving maybe opera goers and give them discount information of the ticket, make their opera experiences more easier. That's one type of the product you can have, the population of market you can have. But comparing to them, Chinese people, they are likely to be part of a value chain, we would say, to serve bigger companies. For example, if you run a small regional, local logistic company, you may want to be part of a bigger online retailer and serve their regional logistic concerns, right? That's another type of business. And this, again, raises our questions about why this is happening, why Chinese entrepreneurs, they don't want to focus, or they're not focusing on niche population, which is actually a bigger market. Maybe that's culturally based. For example, they don't want to work with niche population, it's riskier. And if you connect with a bigger company, personal ties, political ties, social ties, you work from there, it's safer. That can be rationalized in that way. But again, more questions should be answered in the future. And lastly, we looked at their industries and their market growth. And we can see the Chinese companies, we have more companies reside in internet-based and new material-based industries. And not surprisingly, in Europe, new energy is really a big call, so we have more companies there. And for the market, we have a bigger number of companies Chinese companies reside in the growing area comparing to European companies. And we need to remind everyone that the growing of the market of Chinese company may be caused by their fast growth of their internal market. So it may be they're in the right industry which is developing, so it's growing, or it may be caused by their internal growth. You know, people are getting wealthier and they have more money, so their internal market is growing. So all in all, these are all the directions we're trying to answer some questions. Meanwhile, more importantly, raise more questions we're going to work on in the near future. And for next steps, first, we are going to recognize some successful business practices and strategies that we may publish some case studies. And as a business school, we need to create and transfer new knowledge. And from a more macro perspective, we can see both governments, the European Union and the governments in each of the country, and Chinese governments, they are the huge player behind all the entrepreneurial scenario, right? So we want to recognize whether there are policies you can push so some industries can be subsidized so it's growing faster, or the diversity issue can be solved quicker if you encourage more female entrepreneurs or give them more beneficial policies. And lastly, we want to look even broader scenario by focusing on some possible social issues that can be solved through entrepreneurs. For example, the fight against poverty and inequality. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share what we find here. And also, in the near future, we're going to dig more with the questions I mentioned across the presentation. And also, we look forward to share more of our findings in the near future. Thank you.
Well, just to thank again South Summit. We were on time, right? And we have a huge task ahead. So let's get to work. Stay tuned with ICIRNA Center. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's it.